Welcome, Wargamers, to the thoroughly nasty oceans of the mortal realms, because today we are taking a page straight out of the Nurgle battle tome, talking about their interactions with the Idoneth Deepkin. And so if you didn't know, I just finished recording the Idoneth Deepkin lore video that just went out recently, and I had such a fun time. The first story I opened up to in the new Maggotkin book was a story where they were fighting Deepkin, and I was like, oh yeah, this is too good, I gotta do it. So Nurgle versus Deepkin, mirror match, but this time in a different battle tome. Right before I hop into today's story, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon. I'm going to be starting to post a lot more there regarding hobby progress, pics, things I'm working on, travel, pictures of my cat. If you wouldn't mind, if you have just $1 or $2 to spare, it goes a long way to supporting me as a creator, this channel, my wife, our cat, all these kinds of things. Huge thank you to everyone who's already been there. I appreciate every single one of you. Now, today's story is fittingly called Plague Tides. As the Idoneth of the Skye Lane enclave seek to return to the depths of Hish's refracted sea after a successful soul raid, they are confronted by a rotten-masted Carax on the horizon, the slime fleet of gut-rot Spoom. Undaunted, the Akhelian warriors seek to hold off the Nurgleites long enough for their fellows to escape, but are matched by the massed Puscoil Blightlords of the Drowned Men. The Idoneth retreat, not realizing the demon spoor now covering them due to their contact with the Maggotkin carry unique strains of contagion that can be tracked by Spoom's navigators. Diving down within the hollowed-out carcasses of rotting leviathans, Spoom and his Blight Kings emerge to trudge along the freezing ocean bed, their god-blessed resilience holding true even at such depths, and bring new horror to the unsuspecting elves of Skye Lane. That one was a hard one to get through because of the weird ways they always try to articulate Nurgle gross things, but here's the story essentially. We have an enclave that's not really mentioned a whole lot, the Skye Lane, and they are living in the realm of Hish, which is a bold move, seeing as how all of the Idoneth Deepkin uniformly are terrified of Teclis. I like them. Every day is giving him the middle finger if you live in his home, I guess. I don't know. But there they live in the far depths of the Shimmering Sea, and after a successful soul raid against who, we don't know, but I would love that story as well, they're heading back home and they just kind of look out in the sea like, hey, what is that? And it's just like a whole flotilla of dead animals, just kind of like a raft someone duct taped together and just kind of kicked off of a dock. This is an army. If you're not familiar, the Drowned Men are a sub-faction within the Maggotkin of Nurgle who owe allegiance to Gut-Rot Spoom. Think of him as a pirate version of Nurgle. His ship is actually a dead carcass of a giant kraken. So they built the ship inside the kraken kind of a thing, or on top of it sort of, so the bow is exposed. And then the slime and grossness that exudes from this carcass allows them to travel across land as if it were water. Now in this case, they are on the sea, but he seems to be surrounded by other ships of similar ilk. Now I'm curious if the two armies actually saw each other at the same time, right? Like, did the Deepkin look out, see this stuff going on, go, oh, we can't have this here. Surely we will go take the enemy. We can catch a few more souls on our way back in. And they went, picked a fight that they couldn't win and had to retreat. Or if, they just saw each other and like they knew there was going to be a conflict, so they had to engage. I don't actually know because I don't know the speed at which these ships travel, and if they hadn't engaged, then they wouldn't have gotten the tracer slime all over them. I guess what I'm getting at is it could have been the folly of the Akhelian king to think, I can go take these guys, and in that decision he doomed his entire enclave, when he could have, or should have, just turned tail and ran. Nevertheless, a huge fight ensues, and this is all in open ocean, so you have the Maggotkin on their carcass ships, I'm going to call them, and the Deepkin in the sea. Now, of course, there's a lot of things going on in the air because the Ether Sea can project the ability to fly, basically, for their undersea creatures. You got the eels kind of moving around in the sky, that kind of stuff, and they are matched blow for the Puscoil Blightlords. One thing to note, the Drowned Men are exceptionally renowned for their Puscoil Blightlords. Essentially, they kind of operate with some level of naval tactics. You put your huge flagship straight up the center, and then you engulf your enemy with smaller vessels. In this case, the Kraken ship goes up straight up to the raiding party of Akhelians, and then a flood of Puscoil Blightlords descends to basically take care of their armed forces. So anyone riding an eel, Leviathans, all that kind of stuff. I would love a blow-by-blow of this. Like, how much did the Deepkin forces lose before they turned and ran for a retreat? That's an interesting question because it does matter like what the fighting force is left when they get home. Now, normally, when Deepkin attack, they typically have this ability to project fear in such a way that nobody remembers that they were there. And that's not really mentioned in this story, which is an odd exclusion. Normally, you would imagine that the Deepkin would get their tails kicked, they would run away, but then everyone who's left would be like, wait, were we just fighting? What's going on? Why are we here? Why is this guy dead? Like, they would have no memory of the event whatsoever. They'd be wiped clean. Whether that happened and they just followed this trail of slime because it was there and they had no other clues, that's also a possibility. Or if whatever memory shenanigery didn't work on the Maggotkin for any reason. Regardless, in this combat, the Deepkin take on a type of toxin that is traceable. And so they essentially do the thing that Deepkin never do. You lead someone to your home. Their whole existence, as I mentioned in the previous video, is built on secrecy, of not being found, staying low key. And they just gave an entire army of one of Nurgle's favored champions, Gutrot a rope leading directly to their house. Now, Gutrot is an interesting character. He really deserves an updated video of his own. He's featured in many Black Library novels. He is a champion of Nurgle, a mortal champion who's had a lot of mutations, who's constantly trying to prove himself. He's kind of that Korgus Kull level of character, I would say a little bit more so maybe, where it's just a champion that's really far along in their path to glory, but constantly gets foiled at the end before they can attain demonhood. He runs his warband like he runs a ship, which is kind of cool. I really like that a lot. It's a great chain of command system. And so they follow this trail directly to where it leads. Now, there's a problem, of course. The Deepkin their natural defenses are just the crushing darkness and depths of the ocean itself. The way that they remedy this, I've never heard of before, but apparently this is canon now, is they took a bunch of Leviathan shells or bodies, carcasses, piled inside of them, and then just sunk them. So they're using these things as little tiny submarine apparatuses, sort of, and then just sinking all the way to the bottom, and the crushing depths don't really bother them because, well, they're Maggotkin, and they're totally fine. Once they get to where the enclave is and get within sort of the effects of the ether sea, they can breathe. So any air that they had to bring with them was only enough to get to the bottom. And while the accounts of what happened here aren't really given, the fact that we don't know what Skye Lane as an enclave is and has not really been mentioned anywhere else is not really indicative of a good time had by all. What I imagine is that the Deepkin got there first, of course, because they went home, and explained everything that was going on. There was probably a lot of controversy and arguments about what to do because some of their animals are clearly infected, right? If they're catching something enough to lead the entire army to them, some people are sick. I wonder if they lost any of the souls that they had in that raid in the process, and then they had to explain that. There's a lot of politicking that happens before the Nurgle forces ever arrive, because just an encounter with Nurgle that you had to retreat from never ends at the battle because of the nature of disease and pestilence and all that kind of stuff. And it's while they're having all these squabbles that the carcass of a giant Leviathan drops from the sky in their little bubble that is their enclave, smashes to the ground, and Blight Kings start coming out. Now, we do know that the Deepkin build their enclaves in a defensive way. They're meant to, first of all, be hidden, more than anything, but also there are chambers, antechambers, sections they can seal off, different corridors that they can seal. We know it's a rather defensive setup, just by the way that they shape the coral around them, but honestly, even coral itself is still a living organism, no matter how strong it is. So I can imagine once the Blight Kings hit the bottom, it would not take much to unleash enough disease to naturally decay the defenses around them. Because the speed at which entropy happens near Nurgle stuff is way fast forward. You can see things rot in real time. So I can absolutely imagine, these carcasses landing in the enclave. Not really sure what to think about them at first, and then all of a sudden the Blight Kings burst out, Gutrot hacking people apart. Probably caught them with their defenses down. I'm sure some of the walls are rotting away. And we don't get a definitive answer as to whether or not the enclave is completely wiped out. It just says, and bring a new horror to the unsuspecting elves. So, they could have survived, but here's the thing. We know Gutrot didn't die, so they would have had to have pushed him out somehow without saying it. I don't know. It seems like this is a death level event. because the Deepkin exist on such a razor's edge by going extinct from just not having any kids with souls in them. Like, that's a constant thing. These soul raids allow them to keep their species alive. We have no reason to think that these souls were transferred, so they're still suffering the losses they had before, on top of that rampant disease I'm sure they brought back with them, and now you hit them in their home base. And honestly, it doesn't take much to tip over those scales of survival. If you clean out enough of the higher ranking casts and they're now unable to go retrieve souls efficiently, you've effectively destroyed the enclave. Whether or not you killed every single person there, you just have to take out enough to successfully soul raid, and you have doomed them. And I mean, it could even be, depending on how careful their environment is maintained, just dropping a bunch of disease and plague on those things, especially anything that can ruin coral or like natural reefs and that kind of stuff, easily could just destroy this entire enclave. If nothing else, they would at least have to move, which is its own huge, unprecedented process, because an entire enclave, again, they're trying to remain secret. They don't want to move. So either way, these guys are having a bad day. And so let's talk about why this is cool. Again, part of it was just I saw a story that featured Maggotkin and Deepkin, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to do this, just the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of now the Maggotkin have the upper hand. These are also great stories because anytime anyone attacks the Deepkin themselves, they have to come up with some like ludicrous way to get there. I think the Skaven at one point built a submarine fleet that was just like rickety and half of them blew up on the way. There's like warp holes getting gnawed into reality under there and draining the ocean. In this, they all hurtle up inside of a bunch of dead animals and just sink themselves like rocks. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't know how you got out of that. Not even asking any questions. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. It's like if Luke Skywalker crawled into the Tauntaun and then just got transported somewhere else. Like, oh, this is nice. And it's a great, example of why Nurgle is so dangerous. It's not about the actual battlefield contact. It's so much more than that. It's the diseases that those Idoneth Deepkin brought back to their enclave. It's the diseases that allowed the Maggotkin to track them. Like, there's so many things that happen after a battle with Nurgle that you still have to deal with, whereas a force like Khorne, if you smash the army's gone, that's it. But the lingering and kind of deadly nature of Nurgle and his diseases stays with you, the person who was fighting, and the battlefield. That entire environment is now soiled. I think this story, along with the other one we talked about with the Deepkin, make fantastic, either campaigns or just one-off novels where you get to see these forces. How does that rot and ruin affect the Corallium and all of their defenses? And how is it shutting off, say, the Achelians from the Isharan? Are they in two different corridors, like two different halls, and now they're divided? There's a bunch of cool narrative opportunities here for storytelling. You can make some really compelling battle scenes. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is kind of a logical note here, is that this means that Gutrot's boom is in Hysh, which is not massively important, but we don't often get insight into where a lot of these named characters are at any given time. It's kind of like, I just show up here because Nurgle sent me, right? But this is a cool one. I'd love it if they had a future campaign, maybe against the Tyrian army, where Gutrot's boom was there at the center of it all. We know he's here now. Like, he's not going to stop at one enclave. What are your thoughts? Do you think he's headed towards something specific or has a specific mission, or he's just kind of chilling out? I would love to know. Leave in the comments down below, and we'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends.